I seem to remember a time cover trumpeting George W. Bush as such, meaning revolutionary conservative, or is it a conservative revolutionary? It's like a refrigerator magnets are just placing things differently, seem to be somewhat unrooted. And by the way, I think the problematic misuse of these terms in the general dialogue has generated a proliferation of other kinds of conjunctions. And I just point out to the neos and the new. We had the neoconservatives, they seem to have faded, the neocons, which were kind of old leftists, disillusioned by the fall of Marxist-Leninist communism and the obdurate nature of social problems, the new left from the campus upheavals of the 60s, and the currently fashionable neoliberal, which actually may be a valid return to liberalism's 19th century Manchesterian roots. We may go back to that later. So here's some of the questions, the kind of questions I ask myself. And by the way, I'll start off by asking myself, why are small government conservatives? How can you call a small government conservative, if they favor a very expansive military budget and military industrial complex? And I'm not taking a position. I'm just saying it seems that there's a link, if you look at Reagan, et cetera, between those who favor extremely expansive defense policies, which inherently are big government. By the way, of course, the US military is the most socialistic institution around the United States. But anyway, here's some of the questions I asked. Why is it conservative to acquiesce in or even cheerlead for the destruction of our cultural heritage? Many examples, time is short. William F. Buckley's support of the plan to demolish Grand Central Station and replace it with a corporate box. Margaret Thatcher's presiding over the destruction of swaths of Georgian architecture. It was someone generally denominated a liberal, Patrick Moynihan, who led the effort to restore New York City's Penn Station, trying to redress one of the great acts of aesthetic barbarism in the 20th century, the destruction of that station's classical architecture. As pointed out by Marion Rogers, I should point just a word about Mencken and historic preservation. Mencken didn't write all that much about historic preservation per se, but he was infuriated when, after the Baltimore fire of 1904, the city decided to tear down the intact Baltimore Herald building, one of the few buildings left standing after the fire, because of its fireproof construction. Mencken went on to inveigh against the boosters and Babbitts. And I say Babbitts is a very interesting term they use as pejorative, which we'll get to, I hope, in a second, who promised with grand plans to make the city bigger and, improvement. And by the way, that also, if one is interested in liberalism, conservatism, that could also refer to the urban redevelopment in post-World War II, which I take it could be denominated a liberal kind of left thing, because it was planning to make things better and new, which often involved raising existing neighborhoods. And by the way, I also point out, since we're talking about William F. Buckley Jr., helped his family-owned radio station that played classical music to change to another format, probably country, although Buckley himself was a lover of Bach in particular. And just a general question, why is it conservative to oppose conservation? This seems one of these naive questions to which I'm prone. The natural environment is, preservation of natural environment seems essentially conservative because it's the stable circumstances in which, stable existence depends, especially the United States, which is just blessed with a good climate, a range of climate and growing, etc. Republican Party, the ostensibly conservative party, has been, at least since Gerald Ford distinguished by viewing environmental protection, not pollution, as a threat, as the only major political party in the developed world, at least, and probably pretty much in the world with one or two exceptions, to deny global climate change. And then I'll try to control myself here. There are the courts. Now, it drives me absolutely insane to people keep calling the Roberts Court conservative. It's the least conservative court in history. It's disdain for the basis of Anglo-American law, the Burkean evolution through organic accumulation of precedent that constitutes the common law. It's formalistic opinions that are ideological, not based on any kind of experience, unrelated to experience. And I want to keep this up to the minute. So I can only say that Justice Eileen Cannon's special master's opinion, Judge Eileen Cannon's special master's opinion is a completely rootless opinion devoid of any attempt to look for precedent or procedure, common procedure. It's kind of an unanchored opinion that just floats in the air. And also, just lastly here, so I'll stop my tirade for the moment. Capitalism may be the greatest thing since Cracker Jacks. So I'm not praising or I'm not criticizing capitalism, but it's not conservative. It emphasizes innovation, change, improvements, new and improved. The strenuous attachment to capitalism and the primacy of profit may explain the linguistic contradictions that I just referred to. Characterization of liberal may not have generated so many accumulated contradictions. It's a little more accurate, maybe, in some general sense of institutional altruism. But I would certainly concede there are many cases of liberals acting illiberally. The illiberal liberal is not something that is unheard of. But the point is that liberal, this is very interesting, liberal, once a favorable term, it was a very good thing to be called liberal, have a liberal outlook. But I think one of the consequences of Reagan is that he sort of buried that term. And the term is rarely used, least of all by liberal politicians, since, if I may speak bluntly, Reagan made it a shorthand for giving blacks all your money. So no bye-bye liberals and hello progressives. Now, when I raise these definitional points, I'm told, really, I'm given the nominalist line. Meanings aren't fixed and change over time. And that is true. I'm not a realist. But I would argue there are some words that have a core meaning that's hard to shake. Again, within the poles of conservative, liberal, changing positions, people relatively conservative or liberal, but overall, these meanings are rooted. So in other words, there are different shadings, but Scrooge McDuck and Daddy Warbucks are not liberals, and Sacco and Vanzetti and liberal Catholics are not conservatives. So when people are repeatedly mislabeled, Eileen Cannon continues to be labeled a conservative judge, despite the fact her opinion is the least conservative opinion, one of the least conservative opinions ever written. It reflects a vincible ignorance in the Catholic theology that leads to a stupider society, in my opinion, a form of corruption and intellectual opaqueness, laziness, amounting to some kind of corruption. So, and another, it came up. Oh yeah, okay, I think we covered it. How can you say you're for small? Oh, it's not only like the big military budget is inconsistent with the idea of small government, but I hate to be au courant, but obviously if you believe that the state can control people's bodies and control birth and so forth, whatever you think of that, that's not small government. To intervene in the most uh, private decisions of human beings and to turn women into breed sows is not a small government function, in my opinion. In my long career in public policy, what I find is that everybody believes in big government. It's only the object of the government that matters. It doesn't, to me, and this is just my experience, it just rolls off me. Small government, sure you do, but there are always exceptions. Now, I recognize there are many far left targets for satirical commentary on the liberal left, like trigger warnings for Titus Andronicus. Wait, maybe there should be trigger warnings for Titus Andronicus, actually. But my focus is going to be on the fit or lack thereof between Mencken and Republicans characterized conventionally as conservatives over the past few decades, because it seems to me that's the latter that have been attempting to appropriate Mencken as a fellow traveler in conservatism. One of the things as I've gone through this, just refreshing myself a little bit, is Mencken himself is the least reliable guide to defining his political beliefs. He always said, Terry Teach Out is one of the books that makes this clear, quotes him. Mencken always says he's not a liberal, and Professor Hart has gone through that pretty much about sort of the virtues of economics, of tight-fisted economics and so forth. I'm all right, Jack, is to put it pejoratively, but anyway, but I just want to point out a few things about Mencken. And by the way, of course, he inveighed against socialism also, which is kind of an extension of what we've been talking about. But I note that in his romanticized Germany, his romanticized Germany was probably the first welfare state. Around 1883, don't quote me on the date, Bismarck established a state socialism. It's a program formerly named state socialism. As far as I've been able to tell, I've asked around, nobody's yet been able to tell me, no expert has been able to tell me if anybody has asked about that or inquired about that. As to Jeffersonian agrarianism, to me, it's not necessarily a conservative vision, because Jefferson, after all, called for a revolution over 20 years, basically. His idea of the independent yeoman isn't necessarily consistent with the kinds of rural people that Mencken railed against, and that may form the basis of Trump support, isn't necessarily an example of Jeffersonian, in my opinion, agrarianism in action. And also, Mencken portrayed himself as a radical, so he may have said he's a conservative at some point using those terms, but he also said he's a radical who would like to start all over again, which is consistent with my understanding of the Jeffersonian vision. And also, Mencken, if you look at this, he actually got on The Nation magazine, always a very left-wing publication, in 1935. He was placed on their honor roll because of Mencken's activities in the anti-lynching movement, both in terms of the legislation, which didn't pass Congress at that time because Roosevelt was captive to the Southern Democrats. But he also, Mencken intervened in a lynching situation, a lynching problem in Salisbury, Maryland. So he was also at times heralded by the left. And then, of course, just basically, sort of the basics, Mencken 101, I guess. He considered himself a Democrat, I think it's fair to say, insofar as he unlike many of his cohorts who rebelled against the New Deal, I don't think he voted for Alf Landon, for example, a classical Republican action